It's a trio of Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas racing each other for the win, with Denny Hamlin passing Christopher Bell for the top spot over the final lap and a half to take the checkered flag. The win didn't come easy, however, as Hamlin had to rebound from a lap 1 drive-through penalty after jumping the start of the race from the pole. Behind Hamlin was Bell in second, while JGR driver Chase Briscoe was third, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. fourth, and Chase Elliott completed the top 5. I'm Kyle Rickey. This is NASCAR Hot Pass on the Motor Racing Network.
Joe Negri on guitar doing Moon River. We are remembering Joe Negri, the Pittsburgh legend, icon, musician, jazz great. Many remember from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Joining me in studio now is a friend of Joe's, former CEO of Lincoln Park Performing Arts Center, who brought Joe to town several times to work with students and to perform. Steve Catanzarite with us today. Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Good, Scott. Morning.
Yeah, so Joe Negri, how do you sum that up? But that, first of all, he was just like 10 days short of the 100th birthday. So
yeah. June 10th, he would have been 100 as part of that greatest generation and was really a great representative of that. I mean, Joe was an institution, educator, jazz artist of really national, even international importance. But I think also one of the ways I like to remember him is Joe was part of a golden age of media in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. I kind of put Joe up there with other Pittsburgh icons like obviously Fred Rogers, but also Cyril Wecht, Myron Cope, all those guys.
Someone said Paul Shannon today. He was on the Paul Shannon.
Well, that's where I first remember actually seeing Joe Negri. It wasn't on Mr. Rogers. It was Paul Shannon's Adventure Time.
Yeah.
And Joe would often be on other like local programs. He might come on and play. It was really my first, I think in a lot of ways, introduction to jazz. And it wasn't until later when I was taking guitar lessons with a really tremendous local guy, Joe Cherm, who, like Joe Negri, went to Carnegie Tech. Carnegie Mellon was Carnegie Tech at the time. Would tell me, hey, Joe Negri is like a master jazz guitarist. And so it wasn't until then that I kind of started to appreciate just what a great musician he really was.
Well, how did he make the jump from musician to TV presence and TV star? How did he
Well, it was that golden era, right? So they were they were looking for people like to fill airtime. But I think even before he was in college, before he served in the Army, he was performing in local groups, finding their way onto the radio. Eventually finding their way onto this new thing called television. And so they were there at the ground floor. And Joe made the most of that. Really, that had the kind of career I want to have when I grow up, like a portfolio career. He kind of did it all, and he was his own guy. He taught at Carnegie Mellon, taught at Pitt, taught at Duquesne, performed nationally, played Newport, recorded with a lot of all the local greats, but also even he did an album with Michael Feinstein.
Played the Newport Jazz Festival, where the best of the best performed.
Absolutely, 100%. And Joe was absolutely guys like Johnny Costa that played, piano on, it's Johnny Costa playing on the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood theme. They just tremendous players. Joe's brother, Bobby Negri, was a great jazz pianist. And he was Italian, which meant that as far as my father went, we could really like him.
Well, even into his early 90s, Joe Negri was still teaching students. You had him at Lincoln Park in 2017, come up and then do sort of a little master class with students, I remember.
We had him at Lincoln Park, a bunch of times. He helped me out on a lot of different things. But I know one of the things I think that you wrote about when you were with the Times was Joe was a very committed Catholic, very humble guy, very quiet but sincere faith. And he wrote a jazz setting of the Catholic Mass called the Mass of Hope. And we performed it at Lincoln Park with the Lincoln Park Choir. I think Maureen Budway, I think, might have been one of the soloists, and Joe up there with the guitar. And at that point he was already well into his 80s, but could still play with such dexterity. It was I was embarrassed to ever call myself a guitar player.
Yeah, he corrected you once on your guitar playing skills, didn't he?
Well, he liked to critique me. Yeah, Joe had this beautiful custom-made guitar that was made just for him. I think it was a Benedetto. And he saw me one day, it's probably in a break between rehearsals when they were doing the Mass of Hope, and he saw me sort of oogling it, and he goes, well, go ahead, Stephen, if you want to, pick it up. And I wanted to, because I just wanted to feel what this guitar felt like, but I was embarrassed to do it in front of him. So I got it up. I picked it up. I noodled around with a bit, and he kind of listened very respectfully and intently. And he said, Stephen, jazz guys say, hey, that guy can play a lot of guitar. I said, oh, great, thanks. He goes, you play a little guitar.
Ouch.
Thanks.
Well, it's from one of the masters.
That's right. I took it as a compliment.
But I remember him working with students. I remember filming a video. He was like in a classroom. This was during like 2 o'clock in the day or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, when they were obviously rehearsing this thing. But Joe always worked with us and always wanted to be around students. We did a video series, an arts education video series that we delivered online, and Joe was an important part of it. And I recall that, like, the first time we were recording these videos, his sense of where the cameras were and looking at the camera and, like, putting his personality into it in not a self-aggrandizing way, but just in a way that kind of communicated to the it was masterful. And, like, that was just born of so much experience doing it. And so Joe is just an institution and should be celebrated. And from the response I've been seeing online, he is being recognized that way.
Well, a huge part of that legacy on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he was the handyman, right?
Handyman Negri.
Yeah.
Seldom played the guitar on Mr. Rogers.
Oh, good point.
Was not part of the musical ensembles like Johnny Costa, but he was Handyman Negri, and I hope he was getting great residuals from that. He certainly deserved them.
What was his relationship? Because we know Fred Rogers was a jazz aficionado as well. How did those two first get together?
I'm not really sure, but again, in a city like Pittsburgh, which at the time was still was kind of a major media market, but was small. So and again, these guys were all creating this as they went along, because there was at that time no template. It wasn't I don't think tremendously corporate. It was hyper local before hyper local was actually a thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that they just sort of fell in together. And I know Fred Rogers had a lot of respect for Joe and vice versa.
Well, just the fact he was such an accomplished jazz musician, could have moved to New York, could have moved to L.A., Chicago, but stayed almost his entire life in Pittsburgh. Did you get a sense of that talking to him, why that was important?
Absolutely. He loved Pittsburgh. He loved Western Pennsylvania. His family was here. I know he traveled a lot. In fact, I was on Hilton Head in South Carolina. It was a great jazz club there called the Jazz Corner. I remember seeing Mose Allison just sitting in there because he lived on Hilton Head. But one of the times I was there, I was mentioning to some folks there that I was from Pittsburgh. They lit up and wanted to know about Joe Negri, what a great guitar player Joe was. I think he probably performed there. I'm not sure about that, but and he was humble about it. There were no airs about Joe whatsoever, and very, very easy to work with. He could drive a strong tough bargain with his fees, but jazz guys of that era, they kind of had to.
Yeah. Well, is there like I don't want to say definitive, but if someone wanted to catch up with his music, they know him from the TV. Is there an album? Is there a TV show? Is there a YouTube?
That's a good question. I'm sure there are things on Spotify. Everything's on YouTube, so you could go back and see archival things. But all the local guys as well. I know he did an album that our good friend Eric DeFade was on.
Oh, wow.
Maybe called like Uptown Jazz. And I'm sure all those guys will be remembering and celebrating Joe this summer. And Joe's passing comes at the time of another great
Sonny
jazz
Rollins.
pass, Sonny Rollins,
Yeah.
right? But that's where we are. So Joe, 99, almost 100 years old. That's a really great run at eternity.
And talk one more concert about the concert that you had Joe Negri do at Lincoln Park Performing Arts Center, Massive Hope, the Mass and the Jazz Idiom. What was the genesis, as it were, behind that?
Yeah, I think it just grew out of his Catholic faith. He wanted to do a jazz setting of it. I always think about like what church though is really going to be able to perform this work, because it's Joe studied composition. He was not only a great jazz player, he was a great composer in his own right. And so all of the mass parts he wrote in a jazz setting, and then it still had a very improvisational aspect to it. I remember when we did it at Lincoln Park, Joe on the guitar and Maureen Budway. I'm pretty sure it was Maureen Budway. Somebody will correct me if my memory's wrong. But Joe on the guitar and Maureen scat singing were trading licks back and forth. I mean, it was incredible. And at this point, he was well into his 80s. His dexterity and everything was all still 100% there, and just it was a massive performance and very inspirational. I still have that recording, and I'll probably be listening to it in the days ahead.
I mean, it's a worldwide story. New York Times writing about Joe Negri. People magazine has a story right now, and Fred Rogers Productions put out a statement talking about how deeply saddened they are, of course, but they remember Joe for his warmth, incredible musical talent, and gentle spirit that brought endless joy to viewers. That gentle spirit with a musician, those two don't always reconcile each other.
They sure don't. But I've often found that the more talented, the more true that is. Joe was a confident guy, confident in his own abilities, but yeah, warmth and gentle spirit is right on the money. I mean, you couldn't be down when Joe was around. And I don't remember, we worked with different artists over the years, and sometimes it could be stressful to get everything right, to get everything the way they wanted it to be. Never like that with Joe. It was always a fun experience, warm and easy. I told you that we were doing those educational videos. Like the tapings with Joe went quick because he was like one take, and again from that kind of era.
What's funny, it's come out in the articles about when he first was on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and they cast him in the role of the handyman, and Joe Negri told Fred, I'm not handy at all. I can barely swing a hammer.
He couldn't drive a nail.
Yeah, that's what was the quote. And Fred said, don't worry about a thing. It's going to be all pretend. And, I guess his acting, superseded everything.
Yeah. Somebody had a music store, though, on that show. I don't know if later Joe was also had a music. I thought somebody had like a musical instrument store on Mr. Rogers. But you think about that, like you watch those shows today, they are so laid back, gentle. They're not rushing. They kind of counted on the fact that the kids, the viewers, the parents that were watching still had an attention span that was, longer than a reel, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, will they ever make reels out of the content that exists from Mr. Rogers? I don't know. It might not work.
But boy, could this world use a little Mr. Rogers.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a great video of a film of Mr. Rogers testifying before Congress, and the one congressman who was known as I can't remember who it was, but is really a tough guy, and kind of Fred disarming everybody with his. And so Joe was absolutely that kind of person, soft spoken but funny. Always of good cheer, just really somebody. I'm glad that it was guys like that who were on television at that time, which you and I would have grown up watching, because they were people that you could emulate without risk of embarrassing yourself later.
And one of the last of the Mohicans now, David Newell, who played Mr. McFeely, and he weighed on this, and he has told news outlets about Joe Negri. He was the kindest man. I think comparing him to Fred Rogers, they were both so kind, and he had a good sense of humor as well, as you can attest.
Yeah, absolutely, and always like a glint in his eye. You know, whatever Joe was doing, I wanted. That's what I wanted.
And Newell, I'll always call him Mr. McFeely, added that the Joe you saw on TV was the Joe in real life. He was that genuine and
absolutely, yeah. And kind of inspired me to go back and see what's on YouTube, like, because again, it wasn't just Mr. Rogers. There was, Paul Shannon's Adventure Time.
What was that show? Because very young me remembers Paul Shannon Adventure Time. What was that like?
What started in the 50s, it probably ended like in the late
Early
70s,
okay.
Right? Yeah. And I mean, he had like, one of the things was, so Paul Shannon was probably maybe, a decade or two older than Joe and all the other guys I mentioned. But so he had a television show for kids. And I remember, like, in the maybe late 60s and early 70s, he brought the Three Stooges back. They started making appearances on the show, and they had a bit of a renaissance in their career. But Joe was on there, and he would play guitar on there a lot. But I remember also, like I said, when we still had local talk shows. I mean, I guess maybe there are some on television now, and Joe was often a guest, sometimes almost like an Ed McMahon type character, where he was sort of part of the team, and kind of in the background at times playing guitar and everything.
So it's like a precursor to Paul Schaefer being on David Letterman, or that kind of
thing. And those things at that time, they were really well done, but they still had a bit of an amateur feel, amateur in the way of like folks who are doing it because they love doing it.
Yeah.
And again, that's where I think just and then Joe's just knowledge of music. I remember my son Thomas being very young, and Joe doing some kind of a master class and talking about all the different instruments in the band, and my son gravitating towards the bass, and plays bass to this day. So I'm glad my kids got the opportunity to connect with somebody as great as Joe.
I told listeners earlier, I as like a 5-year-old attended a taping of Mr. Rogers when you could do that in WQED. And there's a black and white picture of me with my hand up asking Fred a question. To this day, I would love to know what that question was.
You have the picture?
My mom has it, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Here I am,
that's incredible.
Beginning of my journalism career. But
the closest I ever got was when I was in college. I remember walking up Fifth Avenue and I saw Mr. Rogers. And so, you had to say hello to Mr. Rogers, right? And he was Mr. Rogers. That's how he was, same kind of gentle, easygoing spirit, very approachable.
There was a time,
and Joe was that way.
When Joan Rivers was filling in for Johnny Carson on Tonight Show. And, Joan was very abrasive, Fred was the guest. And at one point, she threw up her hands and said, like, I got nothing. I don't know what to say to you, Fred. And she loved him, but she's like, I'm done.
That would be. It's great. It says something, though, about Fred Rogers, that he'd be willing to go on with Joan Rivers, who was always, her act was edgy.
Yeah. He disarmed her with his gentleness.
We need more of that, because today, if somebody had sort of the brand, so to speak, that Fred Rogers had, they might say, well, I can't go on with somebody like that. But, he kind of wasn't afraid to go into places where he may not necessarily agree with what was happening or the ethos of it, but he would just bring who he was to it. I think I've seen things with him and Eddie Murphy together. And you remember Eddie Murphy? Was it Mr. Robinson's neighbor?
Yeah.
It's a little different.
The inner city version, it was definitely. And it's also an interesting footnote. A young Montour High School graduate got his very first TV experience on the Mr. Rogers show. Michael Keaton, his very first job in the industry.
Michael Douglas at the time.
Right. He had to change his name because of that other Michael Douglas.
I think I read somewhere he's changed it back, or he's using his original name.
Interesting.
I've heard that. Well, and another guy who like Reed Cordick, another Carnegie Tech guy who came from Pittsburgh, and was a great radio guy, and then he ended up, I think, going out to Hollywood. But Michael Keaton was again a local guy who's never lost his local roots.
Right.
He loves Pittsburgh. He's championed Pittsburgh. He doesn't live in Pittsburgh. I think his family, there's a lot of relatives still here. I think he was just back recently, and they gave him some kind of an award. But yeah, he's absolutely part of this, what I say, this golden age of Pittsburgh media and television. Michael Keaton is one of the products of that, and has gone to the top in his profession.
A very big part of that golden era. Joe Negri, we've been talking about today, passing away over the weekend at the age of 99. Steve, anything else about Joe's legacy you think is important to note? Or
I think, talk about that massive faith. He was a great artist. He was a great media personality. He was a great educator. He was a consummate professional, but he was also a man of very quiet but deep faith, much like Mr. Rogers. Those shows were faith-based. And I think I'll cherish that aspect that we got to do the. I asked him. I said, "Can you come and do this Massive Hope live on stage, perform with our Lincoln Park students in the choir, and make it a." And we did it on a Sunday, which I thought was very fitting. So I'll remember him again for that warmth, that gentle spirit, but also his deep faith, which was an inspiration to me.
And kind of a reminder of Lincoln Park and the important role it's played through the years too. Marvin Hamlish being here, Joe Negri. When you were there in Lincoln Park, some very important entertainers found their way to Beaver County.
What a blessing to work with all those guys, and with the Mancini family. Didn't get to work or ever meet Henry, but worked with his wife, Jenny. Before that, when I was at Rhino, got the opportunity to work with Myron Cope. These guys are institutions, and we're not going to see. Hopefully, we'll see something new and different that can maybe be inspired by that. But we're not going to see the likes of these great souls again.
Indeed. We thank Joe Negri for all the music and the laughs he gave us. Let's go out on a little bit more of a Joe strumming on Moon River.